Remember a couple days ago I did that video called Rest in Peace Attrition because DICE were adding the ability to take ammo and health from support players and medics, or they were talking about adding it, that kind of thing. Well, today we've got the patch notes for the big patch that's going live tomorrow, and there's a couple of surprises in there that I did not expect to see, and it really feels like DICE are moving away from the initial attrition model. A lot of people will be happy about this because it will bring the general infantry play and meta of the game back towards the direction of BF3, BF4 and BF1. So there were a couple of things that I just want to quickly discuss before we move on to the big talking point of the video, which is the community map project. So these two patch notes here, check this out. If a medic is holding the medic crate, it will have a 2-meter radius of healing effect that will heal friendlies. This effect is interrupted for 2 seconds while taking damage and 1.5 seconds while being suppressed. And if you deploy the medic crate, as in put it down on the floor, it will also heal nearby friendlies in a 2-meter radius from the crate. As well as that, like we discussed previously, if you've got it in a gadget slot, friendly players can come up to you to get health off you. So it looks as though magical auras are being reintroduced to the series, and as I said, it brings it more in line with previous games. That's quite a significant change, and it feels like attrition is almost being phased out completely. How do you guys feel about this then? I'm sure some people will love this because they just found attrition to be annoying or an unnecessary feature, but other people quite liked the way attrition was and they enjoyed the physicality of the game. After all, that's the way that DICE designed and sold this game on. Everything's a bit more physical, it's a bit more hardcore, more challenging, and now they're definitely moving away from that. It's really hard to gauge how the overall player base feels about that kind of stuff though, but this definitely swings the pendulum back in the direction of a more casual, accessible game. Where you stand on that though, that's up to you of course, if you think it's good or bad. But the patch is out tomorrow, so I'll get hands on with it then, give you guys some first impressions. We also got a couple of nice screenshots of 2 of the 3 new areas that are being added to Firestorm. We've got the watchtowers here, which are these massive structures. I think there are 3 of them in total nearby the coast. And also this lovely blue forest area here, which is going to be up by the central body of water. Manual leaning, like I mentioned too, that's also in the patch tomorrow. Quite looking forward to the patch tomorrow actually. There's a lot of interesting changes and tweaks there. Might be some new Easter egg stuff too, who knows. Anyways, moving on. Do you remember the community map project? Well, what if it was resurrected and brought back to life for Battlefield 5? I imagine that some people won't be all that familiar with the community project, so let's go through memory lane for a moment. I think it was back in 2015 that DICE and EA put forward the idea of a community made map. The idea was that at all points of development in the map, the community not only tested builds of the map for balance, but even helped pick areas, themes, and the overall concept of the map. Not only that, but we got to vote on flag locations, the whole 9 yards. It was actually a really great time during BF4 where the community really felt like that we had a true hand in feedback and creating content for the game. We got to vote on the actual concept, so either desert, mountain or jungle, with jungle winning out. The map ended up being called Operation Outbreak, and even the loading screen images were taken by community members. Now, I'd love to give you gameplay footage from Outbreak, but sadly there doesn't seem to be anyone playing it these days. Let's be honest, BF4 still has a really active player base, but players are more interested in Operation Metro than Operation Outbreak. Don't let that confuse you into thinking it was a bad map though, because it wasn't. It was a really good infantry map. And here's the backstory, because any good map needs a backstory, right? Well, it's set in the Harau Valley in Indonesia, where there just happens to be a chemical warfare research facility. There's a whole testing area where monkeys were used as test subjects, but they escaped. Horror movie stuff. American and Chinese forces then go in, and so we've got the US Marine Corps versus the People's Liberation Army, and they're both there to obtain research. The map was also visually very impressive with a ton of detail. Of course, with it being a jungle map, the core design featured a lot of jungle, overgrown trees and foliage, but one of the most impressive features was a huge waterfall above an incredibly impressive ancient temple. And there were a lot of new assets here, and the temple turned into a real infantry battle, and it's a great place to fight over. Towards the sea flag was a whole town full of rickety shacks overlooked by a large hill. This is probably one of the most active parts of the map, as it just seems to be a central point that a lot of players gravitated towards. The town also had some Bad Company 2 destruction vibes, as most of it could pretty much be destroyed. There are a load of factors to consider when it comes to the BF4 community map project. One of the biggest ones is that there's no CTE around anymore. Of course, when this project took place, BF4 had a fully fledged CTE that was very active and updated regularly, and it was the perfect place for a test like this. That's something that we don't have in BF5, and in some ways I think that's a good thing. With all of the DLC content being released on the CTE before it hit the base game, I think we lost a little bit of the buzz when new content arrived, and so I personally prefer the way it is right now. However, realistically, that was not the purpose of the CTE, that was just a byproduct of it. The goal of CTE was to properly test game changes in a controlled environment. That being said, we saw when we went through the whole time to kill controversy some time ago that DICE were absolutely able to run 2 playlists with different settings. So what's to stop DICE from running dedicated servers purely to test a new map? Without any design knowledge of how this works, and I'm sure I'm oversimplifying it, but on the surface it seems as though you could run a few servers with a test map on without too much trouble. There could be some legal problems though that we don't know about. It's possible that with CTE being a test environment, when you download it, you agree to the terms and conditions, etc. It's possible that putting a work in progress map into the game just isn't feasible nowadays for plenty of legal reasons that we just don't know about. So I imagine there are a few hurdles. There are a few other problems too. Of course, BF5 is based around a real war, World War II, and while most of the battles that are currently featured aren't more of the well-known battles, it's still based around real events. I know a large part of the community would love to have some more well-known battles in the game, but BF4 didn't have to deal with that because the backstory of the game was fictional. That being said, if we had a BF5 map that was made with the community and it turned out to be good, like the one for BF4 was, would people really be that bothered that it wasn't a real battle? I'm not sure. Maybe some would. I think most wouldn't. But I think when the community map project was going on, it was just an incredible thing because the amount of interaction between the developers and the community towards an end goal was really great to see. We got to see the process that level designers and artists go through to create a map. But not only that, we got to see it as a work in progress. Each week we'd jump back into the newest build of the map and we'd see more trees or buildings or geometry that had changed, textures in place that weren't there before, or an entire area that would have gone from grayscale all the way to fully textured and lighted. For the most part, unless you get to play a game early on, most players don't ever get to see anything like this and to witness a map go through the multiple stages of development that it needs, and I think it was a really interesting thing, and something that I'd love DICE to share more in the future. If we got to see more behind the scenes of early builds, I think that would be great. I love that sort of thing. Lots of developers have been able to share way more things on social media recently, and over the past 6 months there's been a wealth of stuff appearing online, and it just gives an interesting insight into the game's development. But of course, let's touch on the elephant in the room. Of course, there's been a huge topic recently about maps in BF5. I think most players would argue that there isn't enough, and there feels like there isn't enough on the horizon based on what we know at the moment. We've of course got a new map, Mercury, coming at the end of this month, I think May 30th, and DICE have said that they are working on more maps. Apparently by the end of the year maps just won't be a discussion point anymore, so I'm hoping there's a lot to come. But one of the biggest problems here, as I understand it, is that maps really aren't a 2-minute job, as you can imagine. Frostbite makes Battlefield maps look incredible. The level of detail we're used to now, the sound detail, ambience, weather effects, we've all been spoilt somewhat over the years, but that doesn't happen overnight. Some of the BF5 maps, from what I've seen on Twitter, took 9 months to make from concept to finality. That's of course a huge turnaround when you consider how much work goes into a massive large-scale map like this. It's quite surprising. Of course, certain maps, and especially the smaller ones, may take less time than that. I'm not saying every map will take 9 months to make or more. I imagine it varies quite a bit, but it's definitely a lengthy process either way. And with that in mind, if you took players through the process of making a new map while involving them, it would not only result in a new map down the line that everyone could enjoy, but it would also take players through the process somewhat and hopefully help them see how time consuming and how much work goes into this. I'm not saying doing another map project would instantly make people not want any new content in the meantime, of course not, but it would be interesting to see the return of a community map in BF5 or even the next Battlefield game, whatever that may be. Of course, the other issue is, well, time and resources. DICE are working as hard as they can right now to add more content to the game in the form of maps. And that's because that's what people want. I guess what I'm suggesting is simply adding to that workload, and it's not really helping, is it? You need someone to control the process, feed that information to the community, including forum posts, voting, etc. But you'd also need dedication to the process to actually make the map and art teams to produce all of the visuals. The question is, where are we getting these people from? And they will already be working on maps as it is. It's a flawed idea, of course, I know that. I imagine there's a lot of reasons that it can't happen, and yet I really wish that it would. The community map project was a great success in my book, for the players and for DICE. But it's not happened again since BF4, so there must be a reason for that. Perhaps the fact that CTE was such a huge focus in BF4 and just isn't anymore a big factor. Either way, if you could decide on a new map for BF5, what concept would you go for given the chance? Given the history of World War II, all the battles that took place, what would you pick? Let me know down below. And that's all for today, guys. If you enjoyed this video, do leave a like, thank you. If you didn't like it, dislike it, not a problem. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you in the next one.